Hi, welcome to Taboo Off the Bus. This is weird, this episode, because I've not even filmed the bus version yet. This is not even the same day as the bus version yet. I'm going to Italy this weekend, so I'm having to cram all the filming in. And then I was like, fuck, I forget I can film in the evening, because obviously I cannot film the bus videos on the evening. Like, that's always been like blacked out. Like, I'm not going to be trying to film on a bus when folk are just trying to get home from work, from school, go out for dinner. Like, you do not need a girl at the front of the bus with her podcast equipment. I always film to be on the bus in the morning, and then naturally I just come home and film the long version. But I'm filming this the night before, and it just feels crazy. So that's why the sun's kind of mad right now, because you've got me at sunset, you've got me at golden hour. This also makes like the most sense, though, because I've been in the library all day, like adding to this episode, so it's like so fresh in my mind. Once again, this work has become more important than my uni work, and I'm not mad about it, because this is a really important topic to talk about today. Yeah, today we're going to be talking about white feminism, which some of you might have heard of, some of you might have a good understanding of, some of you might have no understanding of. Either way, really important discussion to have. As a term, white feminism is something that I've been seeing spoke about a lot more online recently, partly in light of like Chapel Roan's recent interview with Call Her Daddy, which I'll admit I haven't watched. I physically don't think I could sit through a Call Her Daddy episode. I tried to listen to it once years ago when Emma Chamberlain was on it, and I was like, I actually can't listen to this. Anyway, Chapel Roan went on her podcast recently and basically was saying how she doesn't want to be seen as like a political figure. She doesn't want people looking to her for like political activism or say political comments, which you could argue is fine because like, well, she's a pop star, like she sings, she doesn't need to be this political activist, but the issue is she positioned herself as one of them. She positioned herself as a political activist when she consistently speaks up for, say, trans rights, queer rights, when she refused singing at the White House. Was it the White House? She refused some sort of concert or gig with like the White House because she was like, until there's equal rights for all, I will not perform there. She has consistently positioned herself as an activist. I'm going to include the link to a girl's video who I watched who actually watched the episode and properly deep dived it, because Chapel Roan's not the focus of this episode. It's a word that's been thrown around a lot recently, but it's not a new term. It's not a new term at all. I first saw it in regards to Florence Given, who I will go into later in this episode, but yeah, I want to deep dive it today. I want to explain it, and as a creator as well, something I'm really conscious of, because as someone who speaks to the masses, like I've built this platform online, the worst thing I could do would be to come to any Taboo on the Bus episode, whether that be from like really a feminist lens or not, and like come to it from the stance of like white feminism. So it's something I have to be very conscious of. So it's a really important thing to talk about. I don't normally do this for my episodes, but I came onto TikTok yesterday being like, look, I'm currently writing an episode on white feminism. Is there anything that like you as like listeners, as say viewers, want me to talk about, or people you want me to specifically platform? Because ultimately I'm a white woman coming to this episode, and I don't really want this episode to seem like I'm like taking the mic away from people of colour and marginalised women whose like community I'm not part of, because ultimately like I know I'm coming to this episode with the privilege of being a white woman, and ultimately like a lot of the people affected by white feminism are not me. If we look at it from, say, like a queer lens, that's one of these marginalised communities that I would fit into. But like a lot of the women that are left out of like feminist activism and feminism are not me. So yeah, while I think it's really important to like talk about this, I want this episode to almost be like a base point. Like take this as, say, an intro, and then go and listen to like women of colour, disabled women, trans women, like people who are more impacted by the marginalisation and the lack of intersectionality that comes with white feminism, because ultimately I'm a white woman, and I don't want it to seem like I'm taking space or like the mic away from other women, but at the same time I think it would be worse for me to not use my platform at all to talk about this. So what I've done is like go onto TikTok and ask. The video blew up. It got like around like 200,000 views, because I basically was like, tell me what you want me to talk about, tell me what you think is really important to platform, like people to platform, because I didn't want this to just be something that I went away, researched and came up on my own. I wanted it to be a bit more collective, so it's as like inclusive as possible and reflective of like as many people's experiences as possible. So I've like gone through every single comment, taken that on and formulated this episode. But ultimately, I'm speaking about white feminism as a white woman. I'm not a white feminist, but I'm speaking about it from still the privilege of being a white woman. So I just feel like it's important to clarify that at the start, that I really do not intend to take the mic away from women of colour and more marginalised women than me, but I still think it's really important to have this conversation, because ultimately it's better to have this conversation than to say nothing at all, because I know there will be a lot of people listening to this who've never even heard of this term. And as someone with such a big platform, I do think it is like my duty to educate and inform. And with this being something that's quite heavily spoken about in the media right now, I think it's really important to talk about. Specifically because one of the comments that got like hundreds of likes was a POC woman herself, saying that she feels like the term white feminism has kind of been gentrified and kind of lost its meaning. So I think it's kind of important to clarify that up, to like, okay, let's like unpack it, let's talk about what it is, let's talk about the history of it is, so people can help understand it a bit more, so that when they see someone calling someone like a white feminist, they're not actually just meaning they are white and a feminist. So that's what we're going to get into in this episode. I've got my laptop for notes because this is a very journal article definition based episode. So to start, white feminism. I've taken the definition from Razia Aziz. She says that white feminism is feminism which comes from a white perspective and universalizes it. And what she means by that is that white feminism frames women as unified and universalized from a white cisgender and middle class perspective, and disregards intersectional and marginalized groups. So what she means by that is that white feminism is this like notion of femininity that like completely unifies all women as this depiction of like white middle class privileged women that are straight, women that are able-bodied, and takes feminism purely from this lens. And what white feminism doesn't do is consider women from any other form of marginalised background or race or class or financial position. White feminism silences women of colour, LGBTQ groups, women with disabilities and women in poverty. So what this is not, it's not saying that all white women who hold feminist values or are feminist activists are white feminists. But what it's saying is that white women have the capacity to be white feminists, and that white women who only consider their own experiences and privileges that come with being a white, say, middle class, able-bodied, straight woman, if you only consider that, then you will be classed as a white feminist. If you do not consider the experiences of other people in your feminist activism and what you talk about and what you stand up for and what you fight for, and you are a white feminist. So if you were to look at like white feminists in practice, that would be, say, white middle class women who only speak up and fight for issues that affect them and don't take an intersectional lens to their feminist values, to their activism. And when I say an intersectional lens and taking an intersectional approach to feminism, what I mean by that is how different social categories such as race, gender, class and sexual orientation interact to create unique experiences of discrimination and disadvantage. And that's from Kimberly Crenshaw. What was interesting, sideline to that, is that in that video I made on TikTok asking everyone to say, like, suggest people to read, like suggest people to like look into, suggest things to mention, Kimberly Crenshaw, she's done a lot in the works of feminism. Her name was like filtered. Like on TikTok there's a thing, you get like folded comments, which are comments that usually if you say like a swear word or something, it like folds the comment because it's like, oh, this comment might be harmful for some people to see. But her name was folded, and I was like, why has TikTok done that? Like, Kimberly Crenshaw is like a civil rights activist. Like, I don't know why her name was folded. But anyway, sorry, that's her definition of intersectionality. So when I'm talking about white feminists not taking an intersectional lens, or when I'm just talking about intersectionality in general in this episode, that's what I'm talking about. These different categories of race, gender, class, sexual orientation, and how these are often discriminated against and become disadvantage points for women. One of the issues with white feminism is that it's usually this very like pink, girl boss, like slogan t-shirt, very like commodified feminism. And it's usually the most like palatable and digestible. Florence Given is someone who's been consistently accused of being a white feminist, and she's the woman who wrote Women Don't Owe You Pretty, which I would say is a very introductory to feminism and quite white feminist. That is a lot of people's introductory to feminism, and the issue is if you draw the line there. And one of the issues specifically when it comes to her in this example is that she's built this like massive platform, like multiple books, huge platform, educating young women and just any women, I suppose, about feminism, but so much of that is built on white feminist values. And a lot of people, I think, turn to just like one creator specifically and take their ideals as like fact. Like, a lot of people would read Women Don't Owe You Pretty and be like, well, this is feminism, but it's a white feminist perspective. Also, completely aside from the fact that she has been accused of completely plagiarising What a Time to Be Alive, which is a women of colour's book. Like, she was accused to be copying multiple chapters from that and essentially plagiarizing the whole book. But yeah, largely what she talks about is things like body positivity and like self-love, without kind of considering like wider oppressions or like marginalization within these systems, and also being accused of like only speaking out about things that impact her, like not taking like a wider global stance on feminism, speaking about, say, like the women in Afghanistan, women in Palestine, women that are so detached from her lived experiences, when she has such a massive platform. I think she has, like, she must have like, I want to say 800,000, but it could be more than that now. Her name was repeatedly coming up in that comment section. I think her name had like over 1,000 likes when I was like, who do you want me to talk about? I was speaking to one of my best friends before filming this, and she was like, that was my introduction to feminism. She was like, I have that book. And I was like, I have that book as well. I fished it out for this episode and was looking at it in the library there. That was my first, I would say, introduction to feminism. So while we can almost look to her and be like, well, you introduced a lot of women to feminism, that was great. What's so important is that you don't draw the line there. If you kept that as like your bubble of feminism, you would largely, you would largely pertain to like a white feminist stance. What I think is really important is to like understand what white feminism is, so that you can then spot it, so that you can understand not to cap your education at that, but also to understand it, particularly if you are like, say, a white middle class woman, so that you can decenter this from your perspective and your notions of feminism and begin to take like a more intersectional approach. Also, so you can like challenge things you read and like people you speak to, because you're undoubtedly going to come across this in life. And especially the closer you are to being like a white middle class straight able-bodied woman, it's really important to understand white feminism, so you can like begin to decenter yourself and take more of an intersectional approach. Like if you like, say, would class yourself as a feminism, like in your own activism, in your own work, like to begin to take more of an intersectional lens and think, okay, how does this affect me, but how does this also affect women of colour, women of different race, women of different class, women in poverty, disabled women? It's really important to understand it, not just so you can spot it and challenge it, but also so you can decenter yourself from it if this is something you pertain to. But this is what this whole episode is about, so we'll deep dive. But I do think a good place to start is some history. I feel like history is a very good place to start because, like I said, as much as this word has kind of been getting thrown around a lot recently online, this is not a new term, this is not a new phenomenon, this is something that is so deep rooted in history. We obviously view the suffragettes as being like really pivotal within like the women's rights movement, within women's feminist history, but they are not devoid of white feminism. In their fight for the right to vote, many white suffragettes excluded black suffragettes from their fight, from their efforts, from their activism, in order to propel the efforts of white women, actively working with white supremacists to try and gain more power and benefit only white women. I've written here that this is a perfect example of white feminism, where white women did not consider other identities within their actions or protests and only prioritised women like them, fighting for women's rights to vote. But in fact, when they say women's right to vote, what they mean is white women. I've got a quote here that's essentially saying that in those white upper class suffragettes attempt to discourage African American women's participation, they were not just practicing racism, but also white feminism in its earliest formation. It was centering only white women in their attempt to vote, which what could have been solidarity of all women, of all races, of all classes, of all abilities, of all sexualities coming together to fight for the women's right to vote. White women prioritised themselves and purposely excluded these groups. What happened here is that there ended up just being divided groups, particularly in America. Black women had to fight so much harder for their right to vote and ended up just forming separate movements because they were so excluded from the white suffragettes movements. You're obviously taught in school how like phenomenal the suffragettes were, and there's all these like statues like commending the suffragettes, and this is what you're just not taught in school. I was thinking back to that. They don't talk about this in school, but largely probably because a lot of the history you're taught in school is probably taught from quite a white feminist lens. So again, by white suffragettes only fighting for the right to vote for white women and universalising all women as these white middle class women, all they're essentially doing is withholding these systems of oppression for women who don't fit into that. And by that I mean maintaining systems of racism against women of colour. And that same exact thing applies to all feminism now. If you pertain to white feminism, it looks like you're fighting against the oppression of all women, but in fact you're only fighting against the oppression of white middle class straight women. You are withholding systems of racism, of colonialism, of capitalism, of classism by not actively including these women in your feminist activism. By not taking an intersectional lens and ignoring the experiences of all women, you are just withholding the systems of oppression that go against all marginalised groups except from ones of yourself. That's exactly what we saw with white suffragettes fighting for women's right to vote. By only fighting for white women's right to vote, they're completely upholding systems of oppression against any other group of women that does not fit into that. So that's why you'll come online and see people calling Florence Given, see people calling Taylor Swift white feminists, because by only speaking up about things that affect them from this white privileged perspective, they're upholding these systems of oppression that affect people that are not like them. If you're not actively going out your way to include these things, then essentially you're upholding the systems that oppress them. And in the TikTok I made asking people, like, what do you want to talk about? One of the huge things that came up as well was choice feminism. This is why I'm really, really glad that I opened this one up a lot more to, like, everyone's opinion, because I don't know if this is something that I would have come across. Like, I'm learning so much as well from doing this podcast. Like, my like understandings of feminism, and I would say my stance, have grown so much since starting this podcast, because one of the things that come, when I say this podcast, I mean to be on the bus, not just the off the bus version. But one of, like, the huge things that's come with me, like, researching and writing episodes has been, I know so how important it is to have this intersectional lens. And even now I'm saying I'm still learning. Like, I knew what choice feminism was, but I wouldn't so much have, like, viewed it within this lens of white feminism. So I'm really, really glad that people put that into the comments for me to speak about. But yeah, that's something that came up a lot in the comments in relation to white feminism. So I've been researching that today and, like, how all that relates, so we can tie this in. So choice feminism, like white feminism, often centres the experiences of women who have the agency and privilege of making choices, which again is often white middle class women. So what choice feminism often doesn't do is consider the systems or inequalities that prevent women from having, like, the privilege of choice. Where's all my definitions of choice feminism? Choice feminism, here we go. One of the popular branches of third wave feminism is called choice feminism, which is the idea that any choice an individual woman makes is inherently feminist. But the issue with choice feminism is it kind of operates under the idea that, like, all women have that privilege of choice, and that all women have the same degree of choice and the same affordances of choice, when in fact that's not true. It's often spoke about in regards to things like women making a choice, say, to stay at home, be a stay-at-home mum, making a choice to not work, making a choice, say, to get filler, making a choice to grow out your body hair. Discussing it from a feminist lens of it being, like, feminist for women to make that choice, and any choice a woman makes in regard to, like, anything in any capacity is a feminist choice, because ultimately they've made that choice. But what choice feminism is largely critiqued for is that really alludes that all women have the privilege of choice, when in fact the privilege that comes with choice largely is determined on intersectionality based factors such as class, race, poverty status, ability, like physical ability. I think a really good example to illustrate this is what I spoke about in a couple episodes ago. I was speaking about the full bush and a thong discourse, speaking about this kind of resurgence we'd noticed with women growing out their body hair. And I pulled up a study in that episode that was done on, like, a class of women, in, like, a women's studies class. What they were asked to do was to grow out their body hair for 12 weeks. And what was spoken about in that was that it was the women of colour and the working class women in that group of women who struggled the most with growing out their body hair, because when it comes to what we define as femininity and what's associated with femininity is often regarded as, say, like a white middle class woman, like being a depiction of what femininity is. So when the women of colour and the working class women were talking about femininity, they were saying they already feel quite othered from notions of femininity by being women of colour and by being working class. So when they grew out their body hair, they just felt further polarised from these notions of femininity, that it wasn't as easy for them as the middle class white women in the study to have visible body hair, because they were further othered for that in society. And I think what that really encapsulates is that with choice feminism, the choice is not equal for everyone. The choice for a white middle class woman to shave will be different from a person of colour to shave, because the effect of that, say, within society and how you are then viewed, how you are then treated, largely will differ depend on these sectionalities. So I think what's important to understand here is that, say, to view the choice of whether to shave your visible body hair or to not from a feminist lens would absolutely be to do with, like, understanding the affordances that come with that, depending on who you are, and, say, depending on how much you already meet this, like, westernized view of femininity, because it's really important to understand that the impact of, say, growing out your visible body hair largely differs in society depending on who you are, depending on what race, what class, who you are in society. It largely depends on these things. Choice feminism is not something that's equal to all women. That's ultimately what the bedrock of that is. If we're going to look at choice feminism from, say, this white feminist lens, it's really understanding that the choice is not equal for all women. The same thing if we were to look at the choice to stay at home and not work. I've got here written that choice feminism often celebrates women who choose to stay at home as making the feminist choice to reject traditional gender roles. However, many women in marginalised communities don't have the luxury of staying home with their kids because they can't afford to. And the narrative around stay-at-home mothers often ignores the reality for many working class women. Staying at home is a privilege, not a choice. So what's important here to understand is if you abide by choice feminism and would say, well, that is feminism, to understand that choice is not equal for everyone, and there is a privilege inherently that just comes with having that choice in the first place, because a lot of people have structural and systemic issues that prevent them from having that choice. Real feminism here, like devoid of white feminism, would be seeking and like actively working towards all women having that equal choice, all women having access to the same opportunities, all women having access to systems and supports to enable them to like have equal choice, regardless of their ability, of their class, of their race, of any system that might oppress them, fighting for all women to have that equal choice. Coming back to the comment that was saying that as a POC this woman felt like white feminism had lost its meaning, I think that really reinstates the importance of talking about this, of discussing this, especially as we're seeing the term being thrown around so much in regards to, say, chapel room right now. I think it's really good that we're having this discussion, but I think if it's being thrown around, it can dilute the term. And I do think there'll be a lot of people that see it and truly just think white feminist means a white space feminist, just like as a descriptive of someone's race, when in fact it's a complete set of like ideologies and understanding and how someone operates as a feminist. Carrying on with a bit of a history lesson, I was reading about how white feminism was a huge thing that came into play with the women's abortion rights movements in the 70s and 80s in the UK. Sorry, this episode is so like written out just because it's so research based, but I've written here that in the UK, Black and Asian feminist groups had to fight for not just choice, but conditions that impacted choice, specifically amongst marginalised group, which wasn't considered in a lot of white feminists' fight. White women within the abortion rights movement, while obviously very central, were fighting for women's right to abortion. White women within this movement, while obviously really central, were fighting for the right to abortion. Their fight largely focused on safe, legal abortions for women, and when they were fighting for women, they were largely fighting for white middle class women, because they were not really considering the marginalised communities and the intersectionality that came into play with this, such as women of colour's treatment by medical professionals, resistance against virginity tests, and the forced sterilisation of women of colour. And as much as this was in the 70s and 80s, say like 50 years ago, that's not really that devoid of the experiences that we see right now. Like my flatmate is writing her dissertation right now. This is a little bit of a sidestep here, but it's about to come back into play. She's doing her dissertation right now on women's health anxiety due to like medical disinformation online, and a large thing she's looking at is how that like disproportionately impacts Black women, and how a lot of Black women are turning to social media for health advice because of the mistreatment by doctors in the UK. By even like even a step behind like the doctors mistreating women of colour is their complete lack of inclusion in, say, medical trials. So they're not even mistreated just by medical professionals, but they're not even included in the information that the medical professionals have in order to treat them. So knock-on effect, a lot of them are turning to online. And this is what I mean. When you're fighting for things like, say, women's healthcare, say, from a feminist lens, it would be the most feminist lens to really include not just that from, say, a white perspective, but from a more intersectional lens, say, to include people of colour as well within that fight. Because if you really want better, say, healthcare access, whether that be abortion rights, whether that just be more general healthcare for any medical condition, if you want better healthcare for women, you should be including all women in your fight. That example there with the abortion rights movement really is a depiction of how, when you're speaking up for issues that impact women, to consider how they impact all women, but also a reminder to not ignore issues that just don't affect you, especially ones, say, within a more global context, because that's a huge thing as well that comes into white feminism. And this is something that Florence Given largely is accused of when it comes to people calling her a white feminist, is that she only speaks up on issues that not just affect her, but she doesn't speak up on things from a wider global lens. And that's a huge thing, that when it comes to speaking up for all women, that does include women within a more global context, women not within Western societies. Say the women in Afghanistan right now existing under the Taliban rule, say women in Palestine. And I think that is an area specifically that is often forgotten with white feminism, and I'll be honest, it's something I could be better at. And that's not just to say that she can be like speaking up about these issues, but also using her platform more so to say, voice the experience of these women, to share the stories of these women, pass the mic essentially to these stories and these experiences, because ultimately say, as a middle class privileged woman, she does not have the shared experiences of these women, but what she does have is a massive platform where she can use that to provide this more like wider lens into these areas. And as much as I can sit here and say like I take an intersectional lens to all my taboo on the buses, I do think I could be using my platform to speak more of global issues. And again, I know I cannot be like a spokesperson for everything, but that is something I want to do, and I'll say that on the podcast to hold myself accountable to that. Because truly one of the biggest things and the most important things you can do is educate yourself, whether that be like looking at who you're getting your information from and thinking like, well, what lens do they come to this from? Or purposely looking into things when you see them being mentioned. Like, if there's something you care about, think about, well, could I be thinking about this more intersectionally? Am I considering all women when I'm thinking about this, or am I only thinking about the experiences of myself? I really try to consider that when I'm writing and I'm researching to be on the buses. And ultimately I know that no one is coming online and like they're basing all their views off like what Zara Loves thinks, like their views are my views. Like, I know nobody is doing that, but it also is a reminder not to like solely based all your notions and your understandings of anything, not just feminism, but like of any topic based on one creator. Like, do your reading, do your research. Don't just stick to say one demographic of women, like one perspective, like one alleyway of feminism, like to really broaden your horizons, because that's the way you as like an individual will become the most like open and accepting and intersectional in your own understanding of feminism as well. And like everyone I think can always improve. I hope by like even having this conversation, that's doing the right thing. But yeah, I've compiled a reading list of works, of books, of articles that were mentioned in that comment section by a lot of you, ones that I've read myself, ones that I came across in my research, multiple things that we can all read to improve our own understanding of white feminism and to ensure that we are being as intersectional, as inclusive as possible, ultimately for the benefit of all women. So I'll include that in the caption, but I'll give you a snippet of a few of the reads. To kick off, we obviously have What a Time to Be Alone. We have Bad Feminist. We have Hood Feminism, that came up a lot, by Mickey Kendall. We have White Tears, Brown Scars by Ruby Hamad. That came up a lot as well. Some of these as well I'm able to get in my uni library, so check that as well. But yeah, just a sign as well to like hold yourself accountable, understand like likely everyone always has space to improve within these spheres, and to hold other people accountable, challenge other people, because again, that's the only way for other people to learn as well. Ultimately as well, the best thing you could do to a white feminist, I suppose, is to educate them than to turn against them. Ultimately, like, women are all in the same fight for gender equality, for justice, that the best thing we can do is support all women and work together in solidarity of all women, because we are all fighting for the same justice and equality. What that looks like is completely devoid from white feminism and being completely intersectional with our lens. So the best thing you can do is educate, is to challenge both yourself and others. That's the way forward. Thank you so much for watching. I really, really appreciate everyone that contributed to this episode. I've done my best to include everyone as possible. I hope this felt productive. I hope this felt useful. I really can't express enough how I hope this has like contributed to the conversation without taking away the viewpoints and experiences of communities largely affected by white feminism, because ultimately I know that is not at most me. But please go read the things in the reading list. I've largely spotlighted, I think in fact they're maybe all women of colour. I might end up adding to this, so I can't say that they all are, but like mostly these are the experiences of marginalised communities, women of colour, who will be the most affected by white feminism. So obviously their stance, their perspectives is the most important to listen to here. But I hope this is somewhat even giving you an introductory or an insight into white feminism. But yeah, all my love to you. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week.